Hey everyone, welcome back to Buried Truth Project. Today we're diving into one of the FBI's longest and most bizarre investigations, the hunt for the Unabomber. For nearly 18 years, a mysterious bomber terrorized America, sending package bombs that killed 3 people and injured 23 others. But this wasn't just any terrorist. This was a Harvard-educated mathematician living in a remote cabin without electricity or running water, writing a manifesto about the dangers of modern technology. The full story is stranger and more disturbing than you can imagine. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our deep dives into history's most bizarre mysteries. Alright, let's jump in. Let's start with the beginning, because the Unabomber case started with a crude bomb in a parking lot and escalated into one of the most expensive investigations in FBI history. On May 25th, 1978, a package was found in a parking lot at the University of Illinois, Chicago. It was addressed to a professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York, with a return address from Northwestern University. A security officer found it and brought it to Northwestern, thinking it had been misdelivered. When a professor at Northwestern opened the package, it exploded. He suffered minor injuries, cuts, and burns on his hands. The bomb was primitive, made from materials anyone could buy at a hardware store, packed in a wooden box. But it worked. Over the next year, 2 more bombs appeared, one at Northwestern again, another at a different university. All the bombs were sent to universities or airlines, targeting professors and executives. The FBI noticed a pattern and gave the unknown bomber a code name, Unabomber, which stood for University and Airline Bomber. The media shortened it to Unabomber. But here's what made this case so bizarre. The bombs were getting more sophisticated, but the bomber left almost no clues. He never left fingerprints. He built the bombs by hand using untraceable materials. The packages had fake return addresses and were usually hand-delivered or mailed from different locations. The bomber seemed highly intelligent and obsessively careful. Between 1978 and 1995, the Unabomber sent 16 bombs to targets across the United States. 3 people were killed, 23 were injured. His targets seemed random at first: university professors, airline executives, computer store owners, timber industry lobbyists. But there was a pattern if you looked closely enough. Here's what investigators eventually realized. The Unabomber was targeting people and industries he believed were destroying humanity through technology and industrial development. He hated computers, modern technology, and what he saw as society's growing dependence on machines. His bombs were a form of violent protest against technological progress. The first death came in 1985. Hugh Scruton, a computer store owner in Sacramento, picked up what looked like a piece of scrap wood in the parking lot behind his store. It was actually a bomb disguised as a block of wood. When he picked it up, it exploded, killing him instantly. The Unabomber had graduated from causing injuries to committing murder. In 1987, the Unabomber struck again, injuring a computer store owner in Salt Lake City. Then the bombing stopped. For 6 years, there was silence. Investigators thought maybe the bomber had died, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply stopped. But they were wrong. In 1993, the Unabomber returned with more sophisticated and deadlier bombs. He sent a bomb to a computer science professor at Yale, injuring him severely. Then in 1994, he sent a bomb that killed Thomas Mosser, an advertising executive in New Jersey. In 1995, he killed Gilbert Murray, a timber industry lobbyist in California. But here's where the case took its strangest turn. In 1995, the Unabomber contacted major newspapers with an offer. He would stop bombing if they published his manifesto, a 35,000-word essay titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The manifesto was bizarre, rambling, and deeply anti-technology. It argued that the Industrial Revolution and modern technology were destroying human freedom and happiness. The author claimed that humans were becoming slaves to the machines they had created, losing their autonomy and connection to nature. He advocated for a revolution to dismantle industrial society and return to a simpler way of life. The FBI was in an impossible position. Do they publish the manifesto of a terrorist, giving him exactly what he wants? Or do they refuse and risk more bombings? After intense debate, the decision was made to publish the manifesto in the Washington Post and the New York Times in September 1995. And that decision broke the case wide open. When the manifesto was published, a man named David Kaczynski was reading it, and something felt disturbingly familiar. The writing style, the ideas, the specific phrases, they reminded him of letters his older brother Ted had sent him over the years. David went back and compared the manifesto to his brother's letters, and the similarities were undeniable. David faced an impossible choice. If he was right, his brother was a murderer responsible for 3 deaths and dozens of injuries. If he went to the FBI, he could be sending his own brother to prison or death row. But if he stayed silent and his brother killed again, he would carry that guilt forever. After agonizing over the decision, David contacted the FBI. He provided them with letters from his brother and suggested they investigate Ted Kaczynski, a former mathematics professor living as a hermit in rural Montana. Now let's talk about who Ted Kaczynski really was, because his background is as bizarre as his crimes. Theodore John Kaczynski was born in 1942 in Chicago. He was a child prodigy, testing with an IQ of 167. He skipped 2 grades and entered Harvard University at age 16. At Harvard, he participated in a psychological study that some researchers believe may have traumatized him and contributed to his later behavior. The study, run by psychologist Henry Murray, involved subjecting students to intense, aggressive criticism of their personal beliefs and values. Kaczynski participated for 3 years, and some experts believe this experience damaged his already fragile psychological state. After Harvard, Kaczynski earned a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. His dissertation was so advanced that only a handful of people in the world could understand it. At age 25, he became the youngest assistant professor ever hired by the University of California, Berkeley. He seemed destined for a brilliant academic career. But in 1969, just 2 years into his teaching position, Kaczynski abruptly resigned without explanation. He told colleagues he wanted to drop out of society. And that's exactly what he did.
Kaczynski moved to a remote area outside Lincoln, Montana, where his brother David had bought land. Ted built a 10 by 12-foot cabin with no electricity, no running water, no phone. He lived completely off the grid, growing his own food, hunting, and reading voraciously. He became a hermit, avoiding human contact as much as possible. But isolation didn't bring Kaczynski peace. Instead, his anger toward modern society grew. He believed technology was destroying human freedom and dignity. He blamed computers, industrialization, and modern conveniences for everything wrong with the world. And in 1978, he decided to fight back. From his tiny cabin in Montana, Ted Kaczynski began building bombs. He was meticulous, crafting each device by hand using materials that couldn't be traced. He kept detailed journals documenting his bombings, his philosophy, and his growing hatred of technology. He believed he was starting a revolution. After David Kaczynski contacted the FBI, agents began investigating Ted. They obtained his letters and compared the writing to the manifesto. Linguistic analysis confirmed they were almost certainly written by the same person. The FBI got a search warrant for Ted's cabin. On April 3, 1996, federal agents surrounded Ted Kaczynski's cabin in Montana. When they knocked on the door, Kaczynski answered calmly. He didn't resist arrest. Inside the cabin, investigators found a bomber's workshop, partially completed bombs, pages from the original manifesto, detailed journals describing each bombing, and a wealth of evidence linking Kaczynski to all 16 attacks. The cabin itself was a time capsule of pre-industrial living. There were no modern conveniences, just books, hand tools, and bomb-making materials. Kaczynski had been living his anti-technology philosophy while simultaneously using that technology, in the form of explosives, to try to destroy the modern world. During interrogation, Kaczynski initially denied involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. His journals contained detailed accounts of each bombing. His handwriting matched. The bombs in his cabin matched the design of the bombs sent to victims. There was no doubt Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber. The trial became a battle between Kaczynski and his own defense attorneys. The lawyers wanted to argue that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. They had psychiatric experts ready to testify that Kaczynski suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. But Kaczynski refused this defense. He insisted he was completely sane and that his bombings were rational acts of political protest against technology. He didn't want to be portrayed as a crazy person. He wanted his ideas to be taken seriously. This created a bizarre situation where a man on trial for murder was fighting against the only defense that might save his life. Eventually, to avoid the mental illness defense being presented at trial, Kaczynski agreed to plead guilty in exchange for life in prison without parole. On January 22, 1998, he formally pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences plus 30 years. Ted Kaczynski is currently imprisoned at ADX Florence in Colorado, a supermax prison that houses the most dangerous federal inmates. He spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He has no access to the internet or modern technology, exactly the life he advocated for in his manifesto. But here's what makes the Unabomber case so disturbing and complicated. Some people actually agree with parts of his manifesto. When you strip away the violence and the extremism, Kaczynski's manifesto raises legitimate questions about technology's impact on human freedom and happiness. He warned about surveillance, the loss of privacy, humans becoming dependent on systems they can't control, and technology creating problems faster than we can solve them. Some of his predictions have proven eerily accurate. This doesn't excuse his violence in any way. Murdering innocent people is never justified. But it does create an uncomfortable situation where a terrorist's ideas have influenced academic discussions about technology and society. Some philosophy and technology courses teach excerpts from his manifesto, carefully separated from the violence. Kaczynski himself has never expressed remorse for his victims. He's written from prison defending his actions and arguing that violence was necessary to get attention for his ideas. He believes history will vindicate him. Let's talk about the victims, because they deserve to be remembered as more than just targets of a mad bomber. Hugh Scruton was a 38-year-old computer store owner who was engaged to be married. Thomas Mosser was a 50-year-old advertising executive with a wife and 4 children. Gilbert Murray was a 47-year-old timber lobbyist with a family. They were ordinary people doing their jobs, and they were murdered for no reason other than representing industries the Unabomber hated. The survivors suffered life-changing injuries. Several lost fingers or hands. Some lost their sight. Others were left with permanent scarring and psychological trauma. Opening mail became terrifying for them. The sound of a package being delivered could trigger panic attacks. The Unabomber case cost the FBI over $50 million and involved more than 500 agents at its peak. It was the most expensive investigation in FBI history at the time. Thousands of tips were investigated. Hundreds of suspects were cleared. And in the end, the case was solved not by forensics or surveillance, but by a brother's painful decision to turn in his own family member. David Kaczynski has spoken publicly about his decision. He says it was the hardest thing he's ever done, but it was the right choice. He's used the reward money he received to establish a foundation that works to abolish the death penalty and provides support for victims of violence. He's tried to create something positive from an impossible situation. Here's what the Unabomber case teaches us. Brilliance doesn't equal wisdom. Isolation can radicalize, and ideas, no matter how sophisticated, don't justify violence. Ted Kaczynski was undeniably intelligent, a mathematical genius who could have contributed enormously to society. Instead, he became a murderer living in a shack, building bombs to kill innocent people. The case also raises questions about how we treat mental illness and social isolation. Kaczynski clearly had psychological problems that went untreated. He isolated himself for decades, allowing his ideas to become more extreme without any reality checks. If he'd had proper mental health support, if someone had intervened earlier, could 3 deaths and 23 injuries have been prevented? We'll never know. But what we do know is that Ted Kaczynski represents one of the most bizarre criminals in American history. A genius who became a terrorist, a hermit who wanted to start a revolution, a man so opposed to technology that he used bombs to fight it. His cabin is now in a museum as an exhibit about the case. Visitors can see how he lived and try to understand how someone so brilliant became so destructive. It's a reminder that intelligence without empathy, conviction without compassion, and ideas without humanity can lead to tragedy. So there you have it, the bizarre true story of the Unabomber. From mysterious package bombs to a Harvard genius living in a shack, from an 18-year investigation to a brother's impossible choice, this case remains one of the FBI's most unusual and disturbing investigations. What's the most shocking part of the Unabomber story for you? Let me know in the comments. And here's a question. Can you separate Kaczynski's ideas from his violence? Or are they inseparable? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most bizarre cases, smash that like button and subscribe to Buried Truth Project for more untold stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth is always deeper than the surface. I'll see you in the next one.